It was a regular Tuesday evening, or at least it should have been. I had just gotten back from a late meeting, the kind that drags because someone loves the sound of their own voice. My shoes were off, tie loosened, and I was about to collapse onto the couch when I noticed Emily's car keys weren't on the hook. Emily never leaves the house without telling me. Her purse wasn't on the kitchen counter either, which was her usual landing spot. For a second, I thought she might be in the shower or the bedroom, but the eerie quietness of the house ruled that out. Then my phone buzzed. A text from her. "Hey, out with Lisa. Don't wait up." Out of nowhere, no heads up. It wasn't like her to vanish and then text me after the fact. I was annoyed but decided not to overthink it. Maybe I was just being dramatic. Maybe she needed a break from me. I threw a frozen pizza in the oven, cracked open a beer, and sat in front of the TV, flipping through channels to fill the silence. But something was gnawing at me. When I went to grab my second beer, I noticed the trash can hadn't been emptied. Annoyed, I tugged the bag out to take it outside. That's when I saw it, the lipstick. A half-used tube of red. The kind I'd seen her wear maybe twice in the last year. Lying at the bottom of the bin. It wasn't the lipstick itself that bothered me. It was the smear of red on what looked like a crumpled napkin next to it. Emily never wore red lipstick to casual meetups with Lisa. It wasn't her style for just drinks. I stared at that smear for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Maybe she was just experimenting, trying something new. Or maybe there was something she wasn't telling me. I tried to shake it off, but the pieces weren't adding up. Then it hit me, her laptop. I hated snooping, but a creeping sense of unease pushed me to check. Her laptop was in the living room where she always left it. I opened it, feeling a twinge of guilt, but the moment it powered on, her messages popped up on the screen. I hadn't even touched anything yet. "Can't wait to see you tonight, winky face." That message wasn't to Lisa. It was from someone named Aaron. I froze. My pulse hammered in my ears. I clicked on the message thread, my hand shaking. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. Their conversation wasn't just casual banter. It was filled with little secrets, plans, and coded flirtations that all screamed one thing. This wasn't platonic. Before I could stop myself, I scrolled further. Dinner plans, compliments, the way she laughed at his jokes and texts. Something I hadn't seen from her in months. Then, one message that burned itself into my mind. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." I slammed the laptop shut, suddenly feeling like the walls of our house were closing in on me. Emily wasn't just out with Lisa. She was with him. I couldn't sit still. My mind was a raging mess of anger, disbelief, and a flicker of denial that refused to die. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe this Aaron guy was just messing around, and she didn't actually. No, the messages were too intimate, too specific. The house felt suffocating, so I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. I paced up and down the driveway, trying to decide what to do. Should I call her? Confront her now? Wait until she got home? I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles ached. I finally decided to call her. My fingers hovered over her name on my phone, but before I could press dial, the sound of an engine broke the silence. Her car turned into the driveway. The headlights illuminated me standing there, and for a split second, I saw her hesitate. She knew something was off. Emily stepped out of the car, looking immaculate. Too immaculate for a night out with a friend. Her red lipstick was freshly applied, her hair perfectly styled. She even smelled different, a rich, sultry perfume she never wore around me. "Hey, what are you doing outside?" she asked, her voice too casual, too rehearsed. She held her purse close to her body like it was a shield. "Where were you?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Her smile faltered. "I told you, I was with Lisa." I stepped closer. "At this hour? Dressed like that? Come on, Emily. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her eyes narrowed, the defensiveness kicking in immediately. "What's your problem, Daniel? I don't need your permission to go out with my friends." "Stop lying," I shouted, unable to hold it in any longer. "I saw your messages. I know about Aaron." Her face drained of color, and for the first time she looked caught off guard. But just as quickly, she recovered, her expression hardening. "So what if I'm talking to someone?" she snapped, crossing her arms. You're always working, always too tired to do anything fun. Do you even realize how boring you've become? Her words hit like a gut punch. Boring? That's your excuse for sneaking around and cheating on me? She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, please, don't act like you're some saint. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. I was stunned. That's not true, and you know it. I've been here, Emily. I've always been here. Maybe physically, she shot back, her voice rising. But emotionally, you've been a ghost. You think paying bills and showing up is enough? You think that's what makes a marriage work? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was twisting this, making me out to be the villain. Don't you dare try to blame this on me, I said through clenched teeth. You're the one who stepped out. You're the one lying. Yeah? Well, maybe if you actually made me feel wanted, I wouldn't have to look somewhere else, she yelled, her face twisted in anger. Her words shattered something inside me. For years, I'd bent over backward to make her happy, sacrificing my own wants and needs, only for her to throw it all in my face. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Is that what he does? Make you feel wanted? Is that why you've been sneaking around? Her silence was deafening. Answer me, I demanded, my voice breaking. She glared at me, defiant. Yeah, he does. And you know what? I don't regret it. The air between us turned electric, charged with a mix of fury and despair. For a moment, I didn't even recognize her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Emily I married. Without another word, she brushed past me, heading toward the front door. I'm not doing this with you tonight, she said coldly. I'm tired. Tired of what? I asked bitterly. Me? This marriage. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Maybe, she said quietly, her voice void of emotion. And then she walked inside, leaving me standing alone in the cold. I didn't follow her. Couldn't. Something had broken between us, and I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. That I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Emily's cold, cutting words echoed in my head, looping like a bad song I couldn't turn off. Yeah, he does. And you know what? I don't regret it. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few months. How long had this been going on? Had I missed the signs? Or worse, ignored them because I didn't want to believe she was capable of something like this? By 3 a.m., I couldn't take the silence anymore. I decided to confront her again, this time calm, rational. We needed to talk, even if it killed me. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom, every creak in the wood making my heart pound harder. The door was slightly ajar, and the light from her phone screen lit up the dark room. She was lying on her side, facing away from me, scrolling through her messages. I didn't need to see the screen to know who she was talking to. Still texting him? I asked, my voice low and steady. Emily jumped, clutching her phone to her chest like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out. Jesus, Daniel, you scared me. I stepped into the room, not taking my eyes off her. Didn't mean to interrupt your little late-night chat with Aaron. She sat up, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation. What do you want now? Haven't we had enough drama for one night? I ignored her deflection. How long has this been going on? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Months? A year? I pressed, my voice rising. How many times have you gone behind my back? Was it just texting at first? Or, stop, she snapped, cutting me off. You don't get to interrogate me like I'm some criminal. I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from the person who's been sneaking around and lying to my face. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, grow up, Daniel. You're acting like this is some kind of soap opera. People have affairs. It happens. I couldn't believe the audacity of her words. It happens, I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. Do you even hear yourself? You destroyed our marriage, and all you can say is, it happens. Emily rolled her eyes, leaning back against the headboard like she was bored of the conversation. Look, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt, but maybe you should have paid more attention to me. If you had, we wouldn't be here. That was it. The last straw. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You're sitting here blaming me for your choices, like I somehow forced you to cheat. Do you even feel guilty? She hesitated for a moment, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse. But then she shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I should, but I don't. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My legs felt weak, so I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at her in disbelief. Who are you? I whispered, because the woman I married wouldn't say something like that. She wouldn't do this. Emily sighed, as if I were the one exhausting her. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore, Daniel. People change. You just didn't notice. That sentence cut deeper than anything else she'd said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. Then, as if she couldn't stand the tension, Emily got up from the bed and grabbed her jacket. Where are you going? I asked, standing up. She didn't even look at me as she slipped on her shoes. Out. I need some air. At 3 a.m.? She shot me a cold look. Do I need your permission now? I followed her to the door, my heart pounding. Emily, don't do this. Don't just walk away from this conversation. We need to figure this out. Her hand froze on the doorknob, and for a moment, I thought she might turn around. But then she shook her head and muttered, I can't deal with you right now. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. It wasn't until I went back into the bedroom that I noticed her phone charger still plugged in by the bed. Emily never left without her charger. It hit me then. She hadn't left to clear her head. She was going to him. And this time, I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. She wasn't out for air. She was running straight to Aaron. My fists clenched involuntarily, and the anger coursing through me burned hotter than ever. I grabbed my car keys without thinking, adrenaline pumping in my veins. I didn't have a plan. What was I even going to do if I found her? Confront her in the middle of the night? Scream at her in some parking lot? None of it mattered. I couldn't sit in that empty house while she went to him. As I backed out of the driveway, my mind was spinning. Where would she go? Aaron's house? A bar? A motel? I didn't know much about him except for his name, but something about the text thread I'd seen earlier jogged a memory. She'd mentioned meeting him at some bar downtown weeks ago. I never gave it much thought at the time. Just another girls' night, I'd assumed. The bar. That was my best shot. I sped through the quiet streets, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My thoughts were chaotic, shifting from rage to heartbreak and back again. How had it come to this? Just days ago, I thought our marriage was salvageable. Now I was chasing my wife through the night, trying to catch her in the act. When I reached the bar, the parking lot was half empty, with a few cars scattered under dim streetlights. I scanned the lot, looking for Emily's car. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it parked near the entrance. She was here. I parked a few spaces away and killed the engine, my hands shaking. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at her car. Did I really want to do this? Did I want to see whatever was waiting for me inside? Yes, I had to. I got out and walked toward the bar, my footsteps loud against the asphalt. Inside, the place was dimly lit and mostly quiet, with a few patrons scattered at tables and a lone bartender wiping glasses behind the counter. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting in a booth near the back, her legs crossed, leaning slightly forward as she laughed at something. Across from her was a man, Aaron. He was tall, with an obnoxiously perfect smile and the kind of confident posture that made my blood boil. They hadn't noticed me yet. Emily's red lipstick glinted under the dim lights as she reached out and touched his arm. Her laugh too loud, too fake. Something inside me snapped. I walked straight up to the booth, my shadow falling over them before either had a chance to react. Emily's smile froze the moment she saw me, her face turning pale. Aaron glanced up, confused at first, then wary as he realized who I was. Having fun, I said, my voice cold and steady, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Emily blinked, scrambling for words. Daniel, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's a great question. What are you doing here, Emily? Because it sure as hell doesn't look like you're clearing your head. Aaron looked like he wanted to melt into the booth, but Emily, oh Emily. She recovered quickly. Her face hardened. her lips curling into that defiant look I'd come to hate. "Don't make a scene," she hissed, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. "Oh, a scene? You're worried about me making a scene?" I laughed bitterly, ignoring the stares we were getting. "You're the one sneaking out in the middle of the night to meet your boyfriend? But I'm the problem?" Aaron finally found his voice, though it wavered. "Look, man, maybe we should—" "Shut up," I snapped, cutting him off without even looking at him. My eyes were locked on Emily, who was glaring at me like I was the villain in this story. "You've got some nerve," she said, her voice low and angry. "Following me here? Spying on me? Do you even hear how pathetic you sound?" I leaned in closer, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You don't get to twist this, Emily. You don't get to sit here and play the victim. You've lied to me, betrayed me, and for what? For him." I jerked my head toward Aaron, who looked like he was debating whether to stay or bolt. Emily crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "I don't owe you an explanation." That was it, the final straw. "You don't owe me an explanation?" I said, my voice rising. "I've spent 8 years of my life building a life with you, trusting you, loving you, and this is how you repay me." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're embarrassing yourself," she spat. "Go home, Daniel. We'll talk when you've calmed down." I stared at her, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You don't get to decide when we talk, Emily. You don't get to control this anymore." But she didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her purse, threw Aaron a glance, and walked out of the bar without another word. I watched her leave, my fists clenched, my whole body trembling. For a brief moment, Aaron and I locked eyes. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "If I ever see you again," I said quietly, my voice laced with venom, "you'll regret it." He nodded quickly, then bolted out of the booth like a man who knew he'd pushed his luck too far. I stood there for a moment, surrounded by the weight of everything that had just happened. Emily was gone, and for the first time I realized that maybe this marriage was too. When I got home, the house was as quiet as a tomb. Emily's scent lingered faintly in the air, a mocking reminder of the woman who'd walked out hours earlier without a shred of guilt. I stood in the doorway for what felt like forever, staring into the darkness, unsure of what to do next. The adrenaline that had fueled me during the confrontation was gone, leaving me drained, hollow. My hands were still shaking. My thoughts were a chaotic blur, but one thing was clear. There was no going back to the way things were. I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying the moment she stood up in the bar, unapologetic, dismissive, and walked away like I was the one who didn't matter. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was pain. A deep, searing pain that felt like my chest was splitting open. How did we get here? How did she get here? Had she always been capable of this? Or was this some cruel evolution of the person I thought I knew? At some point, I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming through the windows. My body felt heavy, like it was anchored to the couch. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, jarring me out of my fog. I grabbed it, half hoping it was Emily. Maybe an apology, an explanation, something. But it wasn't her. It was a text from my friend Chris. "Hey man, you okay? Heard some stuff. Call me when you can." Heard some stuff? My stomach dropped. I immediately texted back. "What do you mean? What stuff?" The reply was almost instant. "Emily was at the club last night. People are talking." "You good? The club?" She hadn't gone home after the bar. She'd gone to a club instead. At this point, my frustration boiled over into something sharper. Rage mixed with disbelief. She wasn't just dismissing me. She was flaunting her defiance, her carelessness, as if I was the fool in a game she was playing. I didn't respond to Chris. Instead, I grabbed my car keys and stormed upstairs to grab a change of clothes. If she wasn't home yet, I didn't want to be here when she finally decided to waltz back in. But then, I heard the front door creak open. I froze at the top of the stairs, listening as Emily's heels clicked softly against the floor. She didn't bother calling out for me or explaining herself. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the sound of her rifling through the kitchen. I came down the stairs slowly, And when she finally looked up and saw me, she didn't flinch. If anything, she looked annoyed. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, and her clothes were rumpled like she'd slept in them. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Emily sighed, rolling her eyes as she opened the fridge. "Don't start, Daniel. I'm not in the mood." "Not in the mood?" I repeated, incredulous. "You walked out on me last night after getting caught cheating, and now you're not in the mood?" She slammed the fridge shut and turned to face me. "I told you we'd talk when you calmed down. Clearly, you're still acting like a lunatic." "I'm acting like a lunatic?" I barked, stepping closer. "You've lied to me, humiliated me, and then spent the night God knows where. So forgive me if I'm a little upset." Emily crossed her arms, her expression icy. "I went to the club, Daniel. I needed to blow off some steam. You were smothering me with all your accusations last night." "Blow off some steam," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "Tell me, Emily, did Aaron meet you there? Or did you find someone else to blow off steam with?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "You know what your problem is?" she snapped. "You're so obsessed with controlling me that you can't see how miserable you've made me. Maybe if you stopped acting like a paranoid idiot, I wouldn't have needed to find someone else to talk to." That was it. The last fragile thread of patience I'd been holding on to snapped. "Talk to?" I roared. "You weren't just talking to him, Emily. Stop lying to my face." "I'm done with this conversation," she said coldly, turning toward the stairs. But I wasn't done. I grabbed her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her in her tracks. "You don't get to walk away from this, Emily. Not this time." She yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing. "Let go of me. You don't own me, Daniel. I'll leave when I damn well feel like it." And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, she added, "Maybe if you were half the man Aaron is, we wouldn't be here." The silence that followed was deafening. She might as well have stabbed me in the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then, with a quiet, almost eerie calmness, I stepped back. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We wouldn't be here. But not because of me, because of you." Her expression faltered for the first time. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "You've made your choices, Emily, and now so will I." I turned and walked out the door without another word, leaving her standing there in the kitchen. For the first time, I wasn't chasing her. I was done chasing. I drove aimlessly for hours, the roads blurring together as my mind wrestled with the reality of what had just happened. I had walked out on Emily, not just physically but emotionally. For the first time, I wasn't clinging to some hope that she'd apologize, that we'd work through this. No, whatever bond we had, she had torched it, and all that was left was smoke and ash. I ended up at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind that's open 24/7 and always smells like burnt coffee. I slid into a booth by the window and stared at the chipped formica table, my hands still trembling. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, came over. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah," I muttered. She set the mug down in front of me, and for a moment, I just stared at the swirling steam, wondering how the hell my life had spiraled so completely out of control. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled out my phone and opened the search bar. Aaron, last name. I didn't know much about him, but one of the messages I'd read on Emily's laptop had mentioned his last name. It took less than a minute to find him. A social media profile full of gym selfies, obnoxiously motivational captions, and pictures of him partying with friends. Scrolling through his posts, I felt my blood boil. He wasn't just some random guy, he was deliberate, calculated. The kind of man who thrived on attention, who probably saw Emily as just another trophy. There was a picture from a week ago, him with his arms slung around a woman who wasn't Emily, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't jealousy that gripped me. It was disgust. This was the man she'd chosen over me. A shallow, self-absorbed fraud. I clicked on his profile picture, my thumb hovering over the message button. What would I even say? Did I want a confrontation? Did I want to warn him to stay the hell away from my wife? Or would that just make me look pathetic? I was still debating when my phone buzzed. A text. From Emily. "Where are you? Come home so we can talk." I stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of me. For a split second, I considered it. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe she was finally ready to own up to what she'd done. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me in the kitchen, the venom in her voice when she compared me to Aaron. She didn't want to fix this. She wanted control. She wanted me back under her thumb, so she could keep living her double life without consequence. I shoved the phone back into my pocket without replying. The waitress returned with a refill, giving me a curious look. "You okay, Han?" she asked, her voice gentle. I forced a weak smile. "Just a rough night." She nodded knowingly. "Well, whatever it is, remember, it won't stay night forever. The sun always comes up, even if it's a little late sometimes." Her words were simple, almost cliché, but they hit me harder than I expected. I thanked her quietly and left a generous tip before heading back to my car. As I drove back toward town, I didn't go home. I couldn't face Emily yet, not when every conversation with her felt like walking through a minefield. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot of Chris's apartment complex. Chris was the kind of friend who didn't pry but always had your back. I hadn't told him everything yet, but from the way he'd texted earlier, I knew he suspected something was up. When I knocked on his door, he answered almost immediately, his face a mix of surprise and concern. "Dude, what's going on? You look like hell." I walked in without a word and sat on his couch, running a hand through my hair. "It's Emily," I said finally, my voice hoarse. Chris didn't say anything, just sat down across from me and waited. I told him everything. The messages, the bar, the fight, the lies. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd ripped open a wound that I'd been trying to ignore for too long. Chris let out a low whistle. "Man, I don't even know what to say. That's brutal." I nodded, staring at the floor. "But listen," he continued, leaning forward. "You can't let her keep doing this to you. She's not going to stop, Daniel. She doesn't respect you. Hell, she doesn't even respect herself if she's pulling this kind of crap." I looked up at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do I do?" Chris shrugged, his expression serious. "You already know the answer, man. You just don't want to admit it yet." And deep down, I did know. I couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep chasing a woman who had no intention of being faithful, no intention of changing. That night, as I crashed on Chris's couch, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to Emily. Not this time. Not ever. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds in Chris's living room, the sharp brightness dragging me from a restless sleep. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck. Tired, sore, and weighed down by everything I'd been trying to process. Chris was already up, sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he saw me. "Rough night?" he asked, though the sympathy in his tone told me he already knew the answer. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. Chris slid a second cup of coffee across the counter toward me. "So, what's the plan?" That question hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implications. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to just walk away, start over. But another part of me wants her to understand what she's done, to feel even a fraction of what she's put me through. Chris nodded slowly. "I get that. But trust me, trying to make her feel something she clearly doesn't care about? That's a losing game. The best thing you can do is focus on yourself." I sipped the coffee, letting his words sink in. He was right. Emily didn't care, not really. She hadn't cared when I caught her at the bar, and she hadn't cared when she chose to walk out and spend the night at the club instead of coming home. I took a deep breath. "I need to end this. Officially." Chris raised an eyebrow. "You sure? That's not a decision you can take back." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's not the woman I married anymore. Hell, maybe she never was. But I can't keep pretending there's anything left to save." By the time I left Chris's apartment, I had a plan. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone with a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up as I walked in, her expression unreadable. "Where have you been?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. "Does it matter?" I replied, keeping my voice neutral as I set my keys on the counter. She frowned, clearly not expecting the lack of an explanation. "You can't just disappear like that, Daniel. We need to talk." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, we do. But not the way you think. Emily put her phone down, her posture shifting slightly. She could tell this wasn't going to go her way. I'm done, Emily, I said, the words coming out clearer than I expected. I'm done fighting for someone who doesn't want to be fought for. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm leaving, I said bluntly. This marriage? It's over. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked, like she hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. But then her face twisted into a sneer. Oh, so now you're the victim? That's rich. You're just going to throw everything away because I made a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Don't insult my intelligence, Emily. This wasn't a mistake. It was a series of choices, calculated, deliberate choices to betray me over and over again. Her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. Fine. If that's how you feel, maybe you should leave. Honestly, it'll be a relief not having you breathing down my neck all the time. Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. There was nothing left to salvage here. I'll start packing, I said simply, turning toward the stairs. Good, she called after me, her voice dripping with venom. Maybe Erin will help me move on faster. I froze mid-step, her words cutting through me like a knife. But instead of turning back and engaging in her petty game, I kept walking. She wanted a reaction, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I spent the next few hours packing the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, some personal items. Every now and then, I could hear Emily moving around downstairs, slamming cabinets and muttering under her breath. I didn't care. Let her stew in her own bitterness. By the time I finished, I had 2 suitcases and a duffel bag ready to go. I grabbed my things and walked downstairs, finding Emily sitting on the couch with her legs crossed, her expression smug. So, that's it? She asked, feigning nonchalance. You're just going to leave? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but exhaustion. Yeah, Emily, that's it. You've already left this marriage in every way that matters. I'm just catching up. She didn't say anything as I opened the door and stepped outside. As I walked to my car, the weight of the situation hit me fully. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving behind 8 years of my life, a marriage I'd fought for, and a woman I once thought I'd grow old with. But for the first time in months, I felt free, and that was worth everything. Driving away from that house for the last time felt surreal. It wasn't just a house. It had been our house. Every crack in the walls, every paint color we chose, every piece of furniture held a memory. And yet, as I drove, I realized something. The house had been a prison, a place where I'd spent years trying to hold together something that Emily had no intention of saving. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but there was no room left for tears. Only a quiet numbness, the kind that comes after you've given everything you had and still come up empty. I went back to Chris's place for the night. He didn't ask questions this time, just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence. By the time the beer was gone, I'd started making plans. The first step was to take care of the legal side. Divorce wasn't something I'd ever thought I'd deal with, but I wasn't about to let Emily dictate how this would go. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Jeff, a recommendation from Chris. When I walked into Jeff's office, the place smelled like old leather and coffee, and the man himself was every bit as no-nonsense as I'd hoped. Tell me everything, he said, leaning back in his chair. So I did. I laid it all out. The texts, the lies, the bar, the fight, the club, everything. Jeff listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Well, Daniel, the good news is this. You've got a solid case for infidelity. That gives you leverage, especially if you want to minimize what she gets in the divorce. Leverage. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed either. What's the next step? I asked. Jeff handed me a stack of papers. Start with this. Gather any documentation you can, bank statements, property records, anything that shows what you've contributed financially. We'll handle the rest. By the time I left Jeff's office, a strange sense of relief had started to settle over me. For the first time in weeks, I had direction, plan. But that didn't mean it was easy. Over the next few days, I worked through the logistics, setting up a new bank account, finding a short-term rental, cutting Emily off from every shared password and subscription. Each step felt like tearing down another piece of the life we'd built together, but it also felt necessary. Emily, of course, wasn't quiet about any of this. One night, my phone lit up with a string of texts from her. "Emily, I can't believe you're doing this. You're really walking away after everything we've been through. Emily, you're acting like I'm the bad guy here, but you're no saint either. Emily, Aaron doesn't mean anything to me. It was just a distraction. Are you seriously throwing away our marriage over a mistake?" A mistake. That word again. I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My mind flashed back to the bar, to the smug look on her face when she said she didn't regret anything. This wasn't regret, it was damage control. She didn't miss me. She missed the stability, the safety I'd provided while she played her games. I typed one sentence and hit send. "Me. You threw it away, Emily. I'm just making it official." Her response came almost immediately. "Emily, you're such a coward. I hope you realize what you're losing." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That weekend, I moved into my new apartment. It was small, just a one-bedroom, but it was mine. As I unpacked my things, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for the life I'd lost. Hope for the life I was starting. Chris showed up with a six-pack and a pizza, helping me unpack and fill the awkward silences with his terrible jokes. "You know," he said, cracking open a beer, "this place isn't half bad. Kinda cozy." "Yeah," I said, looking around. "It's a fresh start." He raised his bottle. "To fresh starts, then." I clinked my bottle against his, feeling the first genuine smile in weeks tug at my lips. That night, as I lay on my mattress, still on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time, I wasn't chasing Emily, wasn't trying to fix what she'd broken. I was focusing on myself, on rebuilding, on moving forward. And as hard as it was to admit, I realized something important. Losing Emily wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of something better. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. Divorce papers were served, and while I braced myself for a fight, Emily's response was surprisingly muted. She didn't contest anything. No phone calls, no fiery texts, just a signed agreement sent through her lawyer. I should have felt relieved, but instead, it left me unsettled. This wasn't the Emily I knew. Where was the drama, the manipulation, the endless attempts to twist the situation to her favor? Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she'd finally accepted that it was over. One Friday night, Chris dragged me out for drinks. "You've been cooped up too long, man," he said. "You need to get back out there, even if it's just for a beer and some bad pool." I reluctantly agreed, though the idea of being surrounded by people wasn't exactly appealing. We ended up at a dive bar on the edge of town, a place with sticky floors, cheap drinks, and a jukebox that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Chris, as usual, was in his element, chatting up the bartender and hustling unsuspecting players at the pool table. I stayed at the bar, nursing a whiskey and scanning the room absent-mindedly. And that's when I saw her, Emily. She was sitting in a booth near the back, her head tilted as she laughed at something the man across from her said. "Aaron." My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I considered leaving. But then, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the same person I'd been weeks ago. I didn't feel anger or heartbreak seeing her with him. If anything, I felt detached. I turned back to my drink, deciding to ignore them. But then I heard my name. "Daniel." I looked up to see Aaron standing a few feet away, holding a beer and wearing that same smug grin I remembered from the last time I'd seen him. "You're Daniel, right?" he said, as if we were old friends. I glanced past him at Emily, who was watching us with wide eyes. She looked uncomfortable. "Good. What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. Aaron chuckled, gesturing toward the bar stool next to me. "Mind if I sit?" I didn't respond, but he sat anyway, setting his beer on the counter. "Listen," he began, leaning in slightly. "I know things ended messy between you and Emily, and I get it, man, I do. But I just wanted to clear the air." I raised an eyebrow. "Clear the air?" "Yeah," he said, his grin faltering slightly. I mean, this whole thing with Emily and me, it wasn't personal. It just happened. I stared at him for a moment, trying to decide if he was genuinely clueless or just playing dumb. Either way, I wasn't interested in whatever apology or justification he was trying to offer. You think this is about you? I said, my voice low but steady. You're not that important, Aaron. Neither is she. His smile faltered completely now, his confidence clearly shaken. I don't need an explanation from you, I continued, standing up and tossing a few bills on the counter. Whatever you think you're doing here, save it. I'm done with her, and I'm done with you. I turned to leave, but as I walked past their booth, Emily spoke up. Daniel, wait. Her voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. For the first time in months, she looked vulnerable, like she wasn't sure what to say. What? I asked, my tone colder than I expected. She hesitated, glancing at Aaron before looking back at me. I didn't think I'd see you here. That makes two of us, I said, shrugging. But here we are. Emily bit her lip, clearly struggling to find the right words. You seem different, she said finally. Yeah, well, I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm. You learn a lot about yourself when your marriage falls apart. Her expression flickered, a mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. But I didn't give her the chance to respond. Good luck, Emily, I said, turning away. You'll need it. And with that, I walked out of the bar, leaving both of them behind. When I got back to my apartment that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Closure. Seeing Emily and Aaron together, hearing his pathetic attempt at an apology, it was like the final nail in the coffin. They could have each other. I was done letting their choices define me. From here on out, my life was mine. The next morning started like any other. The sun streamed through my blinds, warming the small apartment I now called home. But for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The bar encounter with Emily and Aaron wasn't haunting me. It was empowering me. I'd walked away from their chaos, and for once, I wasn't tangled in the emotional wreckage they left behind. I grabbed a cup of coffee and opened my laptop to go through some emails, only to see one that made my stomach twist. Subject: we need to talk. It was from Emily. I debated whether to even open it. She'd had plenty of chances to talk, and each time, it ended with her twisting the knife a little deeper. But curiosity got the better of me. The email was short, almost too casual. Daniel, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know things have been messy between us, but I'd really like to meet and talk. I owe you that much. Let me know if you're open to it. Emily, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. What could she possibly have to say now? An apology? Doubtful. More excuses? Most likely. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, one I wasn't proud of, was curious. If this was her attempt to come clean or make amends, maybe hearing it would give me even more closure. I replied with a single line, fine. Tomorrow at 2. The coffee shop on Main. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early, ordering a black coffee and taking a seat near the window. The place was quiet, the hum of conversation blending with the hiss of the espresso machine. At exactly 2 p.m., Emily walked in. She looked different, not as put together as usual. Her makeup was minimal, her hair tied back in a loose bun. For once, she didn't look like she was trying to control the room. She spotted me and hesitated, then made her way to the table. Hey, she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. Emily, I said, keeping my tone neutral. What's this about? She wrapped her hands around the mug of tea she'd ordered, staring at it like it held the answers. I wanted to apologize, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Apologize? For everything, she said, looking up at me with watery eyes. For lying to you, for cheating, for the way I treated you. You didn't deserve any of it. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. I don't know why I did what I did, she continued, her voice cracking. I guess I thought I needed excitement, or I don't even know. But I see now that I was wrong. I destroyed something good, something solid, and for what? Nothing. I didn't speak right away. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think this was the remorse I'd been waiting for. But another part, the part that had been through hell and back, wasn't buying it. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Emily flinched slightly but didn't look away. "I don't want anything, Daniel. I needed you to know that I see it now. That I'm sorry." I stared at her, searching for any sign that this was genuine. Her tears looked real, but I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in my head that told me this was another manipulation. "Emily," I said finally, leaning forward, "do you really think an apology fixes this? That it erases everything you did?" She shook her head quickly. "No, of course not. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You wanted to ease your guilt. That's what this is about." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded. "Maybe," she admitted, "but it doesn't change the fact that I am sorry." I sat there, letting her words sink in. Maybe she was sorry. Maybe she wasn't. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. "Apology accepted," I said finally, though my tone was more dismissive than forgiving. "But it doesn't change anything." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, and she nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I understand." She stood up, pausing for a moment as if she wanted to say more. But then she turned and walked out of the coffee shop without another word. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange sense of finality. This was it. The last thread connecting us had been cut. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of her betrayal, the anger, the sadness, the confusion. But now, as I sat there finishing my coffee, I realized I wasn't carrying it anymore. Emily's apology didn't fix anything, but it didn't need to. I wasn't waiting for her to give me closure. I found it on my own. When I left the coffee shop, the world felt brighter, lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was ready to move forward. The days after my meeting with Emily felt different. Not earth-shattering or euphoric, but lighter. Like I'd finally stepped out of a shadow I didn't realize I'd been living under for years. Her apology hadn't fixed anything, but it wasn't supposed to. It was a reminder that I didn't need her validation, her excuses, or her presence to move forward. The first thing I did was focus on rebuilding myself one piece at a time. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. Those early morning jogs were brutal at first, every step feeling like I was dragging a weight behind me. But soon I started to feel stronger, faster. I even picked up an old hobby, woodworking. There was something cathartic about shaping raw pieces of wood into something useful, something whole. It felt symbolic, like I was doing the same thing with my life. One Saturday, while sanding down a coffee table I'd been working on, Chris stopped by. He leaned against the doorframe of my garage, watching me for a moment before speaking. "You seem better," he said, tilting his head. "Yeah," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I think I am." He smirked. "No more surprise run-ins with Emily, I hope?" "Nope," I said, chuckling. "She's out of my life for good." "Good," Chris said, his tone serious. "Because, man, you deserve better. Way better." I nodded, not just in agreement but in conviction. For the first time, I believed it. A few weeks later, I was at a local farmer's market, something I hadn't done in years. The place was alive with colors, smells, and the sound of people chatting and laughing. I was there to clear my head, maybe pick up some fresh produce, but I ended up stumbling onto something unexpected. As I browsed a stall of handmade pottery, I struck up a conversation with the woman running it. Her name was Claire. She had a quiet confidence about her, the kind that didn't demand attention but still drew you in. We talked about her pottery, my woodworking, and how we both found solace in creating things with our hands. Before I knew it, I'd spent an hour at her stall, laughing and talking like I hadn't in months. When I finally walked away with a small ceramic mug I didn't really need, I realized I was smiling. A genuine smile, not forced or tinged with sadness. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I crossed paths at the market a few more times, each conversation a little longer than the last. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just nice to talk to someone without the weight of my past hanging over me. But then, one day, she surprised me. "I've seen you here every weekend," she said, handing me a small bowl she'd just finished glazing. "Do you ever go anywhere else? Or is this your whole social life?" I laughed, caught off guard by her teasing. What? You're saying this doesn't count as a thrilling weekend plan? She grinned. Not really, but I might know a place that does. Before I could respond, she scribbled something on a scrap of paper and handed it to me. It was an address along with a date and time. What's this? I asked. It's a gallery opening, she said, her cheeks slightly flushed. A few of my pieces are being showcased. You should come. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a flicker of doubt. Was I ready for this? For meeting new people? For starting something new? Even if it was just friendship? But then I looked at her, at the way her eyes sparkled with excitement, and I knew the answer. I'll be there, I said, smiling. That night, as I sat in my apartment, holding the little ceramic bowl she'd given me, I realized something. For months, I'd been living in the aftermath of Emily's betrayal, letting it define me, shape me. But now I was finally stepping out of the ruins and into something new. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness, my identity. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like an open door. The night of Claire's gallery opening arrived sooner than I expected. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the rows of shirts like they were a complicated puzzle. This wasn't a date, I reminded myself, just a chance to support someone whose company I enjoyed. Still, I wanted to look presentable. I settled on a simple button-up and dark jeans, something casual but not too casual. As I drove to the gallery, I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. It wasn't just about Claire or the event. It was about stepping into a new chapter of my life. The gallery was a modest space, with white walls adorned with sculptures, paintings, and pottery. Soft music played in the background, and the hum of conversation filled the air. I spotted Claire almost immediately. She was standing near a display of her pottery, talking to an older couple who were admiring her work. When she saw me, her face lit up. "You made it," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I said I would," I replied, feeling a little more at ease now that I was here. She introduced me to a few of her friends and fellow artists, and for the next hour, I found myself immersed in conversations about art, creativity, and the stories behind each piece. It was refreshing, almost freeing, to be in a space where the past didn't matter, where I wasn't Daniel, the guy with the messy divorce, but just Daniel. At one point, Claire pulled me aside and handed me a glass of wine. "So," she said, leaning against a table, "what do you think?" "About the gallery?" I asked, taking a sip. "It's incredible. Your work is incredible." She blushed slightly, looking down at the floor. "Thanks. That means a lot." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crowd mill around. Then she turned to me, her expression curious. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, bracing myself. "You're different," she said, tilting her head as if studying me. "You carry yourself like someone who's been through a lot but came out stronger for it. Am I wrong?" Her question caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered brushing it off, giving her some vague answer. But there was something about her, something honest and open, that made me want to do the same. "You're not wrong," I said finally. "I've been through some things that broke me for a while, but I'm working on putting the pieces back together." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Well, for what it's worth, you're doing a pretty good job." Her words stayed with me for the rest of the night. As the evening wound down, Claire walked me to the door. The crowd had thinned, and the gallery was quiet, the energy of the night fading into a calm stillness. "Thanks for coming," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It really meant a lot." "I'm glad I did," I replied honestly. There was a pause, a moment where neither of us moved, the space between us charged with unspoken possibilities. "I guess I'll see you around?" she said finally, a hint of hope in her voice. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "You will." That night, as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Not for what was behind me, but for what was ahead. I wasn't naive. I knew I still had healing to do, pieces of myself to rebuild. But for the first time, I wasn't weighed down by the past. I was looking forward, stepping into the unknown with hope instead of fear. Claire wasn't my future. She was just a possibility. A reminder that life could hold beauty and connection even after heartbreak. And that was enough. When I got home, I set the little ceramic bowl she'd given me on my kitchen counter. It wasn't perfect. It had a small chip near the rim, a slight unevenness in its shape. But that's what made it beautiful. Just like me, just like life. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new.